loud if I have to. There you go. All right. So we're going to continue on in our study that we started. And I thought we would start this evening by looking at Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And it says, "And you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world." You see, this world is on a course. It's on a path, and the path that it is on is not good. There is someone who is leading the world down this path, and he is Prince Satan. Yeah. And the world is following its prince. And the world continues to follow its prince Satan into some really bad places. People of this world are being led, and they're being led according to the prince of the power of the air. And when you and I buy into this, when you and I follow the course of the world with the path that's in, when you and I follow the course of the world with the path that the prince has laid out for this world, we find ourselves in need of a rescue. And without rescue, we find ourselves dead in trespasses and sin. We find ourselves dominated by Satan and destined for hell. And Prince Satan is about getting busy and working hard. He works hard to try to get his spirit into us, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. And that's what he's going for. And among them, we too all formerly lived in the lust of our flesh, indulging the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. And one of the key words in this verse is the word formerly. Formerly is important here. We all formerly lived in the lust of our flesh. And the idea of flesh there, if you want to know what it is in a simple way to remember it, it's like gathering together and tuning up for the opera. We all get together and we sing me, 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 because we are all about me. And that's what the works of the flesh are. More about me, less about you. It's all about me. And this was something that it was former. People that do this have a tendency to have personal pronoun problems. We start every sentence with the word I. And I, Mac, iPhone, iPad, iChurch, I. But it was something that was formerly. In order for it to be formally, what had to happen? Something had to change. And what changed is a dead man came back to life. The living one. And Jesus says, "And I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and of Hades." Something drastic changed. It changed everything when Jesus came back to life. Nothing will ever be the same. And we kind of started this out each time like this. Jesus' resurrection is something to be reckoned with. And what we've been looking at is the appearance he makes to people after the resurrection. We've looked at Mary Magdalene. We've looked at the other women, the 2 men on the road to Emmaus, Simon Peter, the 10 apostles, and those that were with him, and Thomas. And everything changed for those and for us alike. The appearance of Jesus makes the purpose obvious. The world was about to receive some good news. And this good news would be spread to God's sheep by others who were saved. It would be spread by others who love the Lord. Now I got to tell you, at the age of 13, I became a Christian. And I remember very well where it was. It was Herb knows Harding Street. It was a Harding Street. My dad drove us down there, and in Hollywood. And you know what happened on Monday? Do you know what happened in my life on Monday? I went to middle school, just like I had always gone. Things just kept on. I went to middle school on Monday, and I finished middle school and was able to move on into high school. where I built hot rods and played in bands and went to church 3 times a week. 3 times a week. And then I went to FC for a semester, became a photographer, got married, became a dad, went to college, became a software engineer, and the whole time I went to church 3 times a week. My life hadn't really changed whenever I became a Christian. You know, Jesus' resurrection changed the world, but whenever I put on Christ, my life really didn't change drastically. I kept on doing the things that I was familiar with. And I continued the whole time. And eventually I was put on duty rosters to teach classes, to lead singing, to say prayers, to give Lord's Supper talks. And then Ann and I, we came here. And we built relationships with our God and with our brethren. And I'll be honest with you though, I like familiarity. I do. I like familiarity. And whenever we got on let me get this right, on the left side of that circle, that slide that was up there at the beginning, and you start talking about reaching the lost, you know what that is? That is not familiar. That's kind of scary. That's not the familiar things that I feel good about, that I like to do and I'm comfortable with. It takes me out of my comfort zone, and I really want to stick to the things that I know. Now tonight we're going to be looking in John chapter 21, and those of you who know the play Fiddler on the Roof, I've already made one Fiddler reference, but this is the scene where there's a song going on there. The question in the song is, "Do you love me?" To which his wife is, what? Do I love you? And they sing this song and trying to determine if after 25 years of being together, they've raised this family, do you love me? This becomes a question. And it's a horrible ending to this song because they determine first off that, yeah, I love you. But then these words, but it doesn't change a thing. That's actually the word, it doesn't change a thing. We're going to see tonight that Jesus is going to ask Peter, do you love me? And I'm here to tell you right now, it changed everything. The love of Jesus changes everything, and it has deep meaning. And the kind of love that we're talking about here, everything changes. And so let's just take a look at this for a moment. I'm going to read through it. So if you have your Bibles, you can follow along. John 21, and it starts in verse 1. It says, after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he manifested himself in this way. And I think it's rather interesting that this is the way that Jesus chose to do this. To me, this says, pay attention. Because here's how he did it. It's not just any old manifestation. This is planned. This has purpose behind it. So Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee and the sons of Zebedee and 2 others of his disciples were together. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. See, nothing has changed in his life. You know what he did after the resurrection? He went back to what he was familiar with. He's comfortable there. I'm going fishing. And they said to him, you know what? We'll also come with you. And they went out and got into the boat. And that night, they caught nothing. They didn't catch anything. These disciples are seeking familiarity, something that they were accustomed to, something that they did before they ever met Jesus. But everything has changed forever in Peter and these disciples. You know, one thing's for certain, they were professional fishermen. They've gotten really bad at fishing, and it's not going real well for them. They catch nothing. In verse 4, but when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Wouldn't you have liked to have seen Jesus standing on a beach? There he is, he's looking out the water. Here's these professional fishermen, and there's a guy on the beach. It's Jesus, but they don't know. It says, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus in verse 4. So Jesus said to them, children, do you have, he says, you do not have any fish, do you? He's a know-it-all. Here's these professional fishermen, this know-it-all saying, you guys don't have any fish. And you know why he's able to do that? Because he is a know-it-all. He knows all. They don't have any fish. But it gets better. And he said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. You know, you like a guy standing around telling you how to do your job? You know, so they cast this net on the right-hand side of the boat, and they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Now, what's going on in everybody's mind in this classroom right now? Have you ever seen this before? Okay, we've seen this before, haven't we? We saw this in Luke chapter 5, in verses 4 through 11. It says that when they had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let your nets for a catch. And Simon answered and said, Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. But I will do as you say and let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them. And they came and filled both of the boats so that they began to sink. We've got nets tearing. We've got boats sinking. And in verse 8, it says this about Simon Peter. See, this is the start of the conversation. It says this about Simon Peter, that he fell down at Jesus' feet saying, go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. When I read that, I see humility. I see somebody who recognizes the Lord in a very powerful way. It says it was for amazement. Peter is amazed at this, for amazement had seized him and all his companions. Everybody in the boat is amazed at Jesus at this point, thinking, I shouldn't even be around this person. I'm a sinner. Good news. He was just the sorts that Jesus was looking for. A sinner just like me. And so also were James and the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, do not fear. From now on, and he tells him what he's going to be catching. From now on, you will be catching men. And at that point in time, the text says when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. Okay, so what brought us to this point of they're back fishing for fish? They're not fishing for men, they're fishing for fish. And we're going to look at that. So going back to John 21 where we left off, verse 7, therefore the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, and I love this, whenever he says put the net over and they pull up all these fish, he goes, you know who that is, don't you? It's who? It's Jesus. It's the Lord. I think this is interesting. They don't recognize him, and I like Brian. I'm not gonna speculate on that, Brian, but that was really interesting about them not recognizing Jesus. Here again, but they know this. They've seen this story before. We've seen fish in these nets before like this. It's the Lord, and there was no doubt about that in their minds. And therefore the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. So Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord. He put his outer garment on because he was stripped for work and threw himself into the sea. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far off from land, but 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid. And I think that as we unfold this tonight a little bit, I think Jesus is knocking on the door of some people's hearts. He's doing it in a very powerful way here. Anyways, a charcoal fire already laid and fish placed on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you have now caught. And now the fish that they brought over, by the way, were real fish. They were fish. They weren't men because they weren't out fishing for men. And then in verse 11, Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of large fish, and 153. And although there were so many, this time it's a little different. The net was not torn. The boat didn't sink, and the net wasn't torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Break your fast and come and eat. And none of the disciples ventured to question him, who are you? Knowing that it was the Lord. We're not going to ask. We know who this is. Everybody in this room knows who it was. We've seen this before. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. And this is now, and it says this is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So, this brings us to a conversation between Jesus and Peter. And we're going to circle around to some of this again, but I want you to see it this other point. I'm not going to be as linear as maybe I should be. We're going to continue on. So there's a conversation, a meal after breakfast. The conversation that many talk about is this, and this is a point that's brought up. This conversation between Jesus and Peter, many people have struggled with. I was taught something when I was younger that I don't really hold to, and I'm going to show you that now and explain maybe a better way of looking at this. The conversation, Jesus asks 3 questions, and Peter offers 3 replies on this third manifestation of Jesus to those after his resurrection. And the question that Jesus has asked Peter is, do you love me? And Peter replies, you know that I love you. But if you were reading the Greek text, you would see what's up on the PowerPoint right now. You would notice that there's actually 2 different Greek words used in this exchange, in this dialogue. And the Greek verbs, agapio and phileo. I'm going to probably say agape because it's easier for me to say agape, but agapio is the verb that's here. And people will point out, if you're reading the Greek text, you see this. Well, this has created a lot of different views on this. Why does he say this one thing and then change the words? And many hold a view that goes like this, that the answer is an understanding of the Greek language and the terminology of these 2 words. The problem with that is that they don't agree on that. Agapeo is said to represent selfless and unemotional love, while phileo refers to a mutual affectionate love. And these arguments of the Greek are split amongst people who write commentaries. Some commentators will suggest that since agapeo is unemotional, it was too cold of a term for Peter to say, and Peter really wanted to be more affectionate, letting the Lord know how affectionate he was towards him, so he chose the warmer of the 2 words. While other commentators take a complete flip on that and say, oh, no, that agapeo is a higher type of word, more divine and has more meaning to it, and Peter could not bring himself to profess the highest sort of love and could only pledge the love of a lesser quality for Jesus, and Jesus graciously, condescended to meet him halfway and used the word the 3rd time himself. Do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And you can see how it changes back and forth. I can hardly see it. Hopefully you can. Yeah, you can see that. And so that's basically the view that I grew up with in hearing that type of teaching. But I want to just suggest something else, that these words are a lot more similar to one another than they are different. They're synonyms. Earlier this week, I texted Anna and I said, can you give me another word for thesaurus? She gave me 2 words. She wasn't able to just give me 1. But these are synonyms, and I'm going to help you so you can, teach other people this. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the use of this word in parallel type passages. This first one is in Luke 11, verse 43, and Luke 20. And look at the language that's used here. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love, and that's agape or agapeo, the chief seats in the synagogues and the respectful greetings in the marketplace. But look at chapter 20, verse 46. Same type of idea, same type of concept, same type of thing being communicated. Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love respectful greetings in the marketplaces and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at the banquets. 2 different words, though. This time it's phileo. You know why? Because you know why, don't you? Okay. Love is a hard concept. And just because you read the Greek doesn't mean you're going to know more about love. I one time asked somebody who I'm related to who is a real word geek, and that was the answer. Somebody brought this passage up and said, so what do we learn from the Greek here? And that's what he said. He says, that love's a difficult concept in any language. I love ice cream. I love my wife. In the context, you all understand that. Well, the context here, I understand it too. It doesn't matter which word he uses. The next one I want to look at is John chapter 3, verse 35. This one, the Father loves, certainly that's the higher form of love, agapeo. The Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. But look at John chapter 5, verse 20, where he uses phileo. For the Father loves the Son. He says the exact same thing. You know why? Because these words are synonymous. And there's nothing really to be rattled by over this. And then in John chapter 21 and verse 20, and this is one where John's going to talk about how he refers to himself. Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, agapeo, following them, the one who had also leaned back on his bosom at the supper and said, Lord, who is the one? But look at chapter 20 and verse 2. So she ran, this is talking about Mary the Magdalene. So she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciples whom Jesus loved. This time it's phileo. And said to them, they have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. Who betrays you? It's an overstatement for people to say, too, that agape, these are all agape here, that agapeo somehow is a higher, more divine form of love. Look at this use here. For Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me. Just doesn't give me that vibe. Or for even sinners love those who love them. And men love darkness rather than light. These are all agapeo terms. And they love the approval of men rather than the approval of God. Because context determines what love is whether it's Greek or English or French or whatever language you might be looking at. So if these words are basically synonymous, why in John's record of the conversation between Jesus and Peter does he use different words? So let me ask you, why do writers use synonyms?
So you don't get bored reading the same thing over and over?
So you don't get bored reading the same thing over and over. Anybody else? I agree with that. For Herb?
Give a fuller breadth and meaning.
Give depth and meaning. Chloe's point is well taken that there's no redundancy. It helps build understanding. Will?
Using words that you might know better than others.
Maybe somebody catches on, because you're using different words and maybe didn't understand that first one, but they got it. A fuller meaning. Writers do this all the time. And guess what? John's no different. And to further demonstrate this, the more interesting read, and so it happens that whenever John writes this, that this isn't the only place where he uses synonyms. It gets better. All right, so here is, I was accused years ago of a snazzy chart. This is going to be a snazzy chart, all right? And so how does this work? Well, in this passage, yeah. Is this playing on the PC or the Mac? Because my fonts are definitely moved around. Okay, we can still see the colors though. So we see love, we're missing a love. Oh, it's over there on the right. Everything's moved. This passage is going to really look weird. I'm hoping that's on the PC. That's really odd. At any rate, agape. He uses agape for love and for love, and he also uses phileo 4 times. So 2 times in this passage we see agape. 4 times John uses the word phileo. The other word is, you can't see this, but it's tend. You can kind of see it. It's bosco. He uses bosco twice for tend my sheep or feed my sheep in some, and others will say shepherd, and shepherd is way off the center. None of these are pointing at each other at all. Total annihilation of the PowerPoint here. and I was afraid of this, and I said, can't. I think it's on the PC. I just think it's the resolution is different than maybe what I created it in. But anyways, the idea is here he does this with other words that mean the same thing. And he's got poimaino and he's got bosco. One is feed, one is tend. And then Peter is to feed or tend the lambs, which is arnia, in chapter 21 and verse 15, and the sheep, which is probaton. And Peter says the Lord knows is edo. And the other word that he uses here for knows is gnostos. which is where they get the idea of Gnosticism from, or knowledge. And so he's using synonyms through this whole passage to say no and no, to say feed and tend, to say, shepherd. And he does this in many places in this. And he's a writer that, look at that, it does line up. And so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that and you can tell by the color coding, that I love you. And he said, tend my lambs. And he said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And he said to him, shepherd my sheep, this time using the other words. And he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time. See, he asked this question 3 times. So that's the next question. Why does Jesus ask this question 3 times? At the heart of it. Okay, because Peter denied him 3 times. So I don't know if that helps you, but just remember that's what's going on here. There's synonyms all over this passage and all over all the writings. We should be thankful that our translators do really an excellent job. I think it's interesting how they came up with equivalents that were different for all the other synonyms in here. But they saw that word love and they went, this is hard. It is hard. The concept of love has many different facets to it. It just does. There's another level. There's another piece of this that goes deeper and deeper and deeper. All right, so Jesus commissions Peter to feed in chapter 21, verses 15, 17, and to tend the lambs and to love. And then the question is love. So there is no major distinction to be drawn, really, I think, from these synonyms. And I would go with the obvious. This is said and asked 3 times because of something else that happened. Now, I was looking at an article that Shane Scott wrote, and he covers this a lot better than I just did. But he says that whenever people do this, he called it sloppy agape. That it's a bad idea to kind of go back to that. Not that the Greek is not an interesting thing to know. Aren't you glad there's people that study it? And I know people that study it, and I'm glad that but honestly, Phil, do we all need to know Greek? What? Do we all need to know Greek? Yeah. It's like, and this is not something that you need to know to understand. And it's just like what you think you're reading here in English. So how should we look at this? Well, let's talk about the setting. Discussion after finishing a meal. And notice that the exchange that takes place after breakfast. There's some things I want you to note. And just in verse 7, Simon had his garment stripped off because he was doing what? What was he doing? Why was his garment stripped back on the boat? He was working. And can you think of another conversation between Jesus and Peter in the presence of other disciples that took place right after a meal? Anybody got one? Okay. That's right. The meal right after the Lord's Supper. And there's a conversation that takes place in an upper room in John 13. And what does Jesus do after the Last Supper? He goes to work, doesn't he? He takes off his garment and he goes to work. And he gives them an object lesson when he does this. And what does Peter claim about his devotion to the Lord at that supper? Let's turn over there. John chapter 13. What is it that Peter said exactly? Okay, John chapter 13, verses 36 through 38. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered, where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. And Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you right now? And then he makes this bold statement, I will lay down my life for you. That's who I am. This is a much different Peter than the one we saw in Luke 5, isn't it? Where get away from me, we shouldn't be in the same room, I'm a sinner, to boldness. And that's a bold statement. I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. And that's the fact of what happened. This is a boast. And I think it changes the way the story in John 21 unrolls and the questions that are asked. Instead of falling down saying, go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man, he's a little certain of himself. But in John 13, it's a boast in response to Peter's boast that he would follow Jesus to death. The Lord told him what would really happen. And that is exactly what happened when we read in John 18, starting in verse 15 through 27. We see Peter do that very thing. And when you look at the details of that, you see something else that's in this passage, a charcoal fire. Peter's warming himself by the fire when he's going to deny the Lord. And the thing about the word charcoal here, okay, in the Greek, it says that word is used twice. It's used whenever Peter denies the Lord, and it's whenever Jesus is on the beach with the food there. It's the only 2 places it shows up. And so you have this charcoal fire burning there. And I can only imagine, I know I'm speculating a little bit here, but can you imagine Peter making the shore, and he comes up and he sees the charcoal fire and he smells that charcoal burning, and, it's all too familiar. It's all just a little bit too familiar what's unfolding here. This is the setting of Peter's 3 denials. And Jesus is turning into the setting for these 3 questions that he's going to ask him. And the questions, to be specific, the first question, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these? Turn over to Matthew chapter 26 for a second. And I want you to hear this. Matthew 26, verse 33. But Peter said to him, even though all may fall away, because of you, I will never fall away. And Jesus said to him, truly I say to you this very night. You catch how he words it there? All the other guys, not me. You know why he's able to say that? Because Peter thinks, I love him more than these. I love him more than anybody. I love you more than anybody else. I'll give up my life for me. And everybody else is going to walk away from you, but not me. So the opening question is rather powerful. Do you love me more than these? And the reality that Peter must have felt. He's not going to say, I love you more than these. What's he say? What's he say? What's his answer to Jesus when Jesus asked him? More than these, or does he say, I love you? I love you. Not more than these. I'm in a different place than I was before. And I think it's a tough battle for him. This time Peter just says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. No longer does he boast like he did in Matthew 26. He loves Jesus, but is unwilling to assert that he loves him more than the other disciples. That can't be real. Are you sure? What time do we end this class? 8:05. I'm dragging my feet. Sorry, Brian. Jesus denied Peter. Jesus, just as Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Now Jesus questions him 3 times about his love. He says, this gives some explanation of why it's going to say that Peter was grieved in verse 17, because Jesus said it to him the 3rd time. It reminded him, I think on purpose, of the denial. When Jesus asked the 3 questions, and I might have to abandon my PowerPoint. Jesus is giving Peter an opportunity to reaffirm his love 3 times. Dude, there's multiple ways of looking at this. One is that there's a lot of compassion in this. I'm going to give you a chance because Jesus loved Peter. I'm going to give you a chance to express your love 3 times. And in doing that, Jesus just doesn't let him hang. What does Jesus say to him with each reply? I mean, how does he reply to him? He tells him to do what? Get out of my sight? You've got no part of me anymore? Is that what he says?
To do something for the brethren.
Okay, he gives him a commission, doesn't he? I want you to feed my sheep. That's what I want from you. I want you to feed my sheep. Tend and feed the lambs of Christ. Peter, who was boastful and brash, failed to follow Jesus to the cross. And this forgiven and renewed Peter will be able to do so. His denial is replaced with a 3-fold question, a 3-fold confession, and a 3-fold commission to go and feed the sheep. If you want to know what love is, it's this. What does love mean? Well, love is forgiveness, love is reconciliation, and love is renewal. Now, when I started putting this together, that wasn't the way I was going. And in the few minutes we have, I'm just going to give you this other part of this. It was meant to make you feel bad. And me, I feel bad too. It's the reality, and it goes back to that kid that really not much changed in middle school. You know, we had the fishermen denying the Lord 3 times. And then after the resurrection, they go back to the comfort zone. And Jesus wants Peter to do something. He says, feed my sheep. He's really asking him to go and do something. Jesus has asked us to go and do something. And if you love me, you will keep my commandments. This keeps ringing in my head. And I was going to open up the floor tonight with an opportunity for us all to rationalize that away. Because that's what I really want to do. And there's some things that you could say about how we do that, but I want us all to be bothered by the fact that, like Peter was, and that now he's asking us to go. I like that first reaction where he left everything and he followed Jesus. It's hard for me to leave everything because I'm going to rationalize all the reasons why I've got to have it. Things like, well, it's about balance. And didn't God want me to subdue the earth? And Jesus said, feed my sheep, who's going to feed me? And if you remember, Jesus has already done this with the 70, didn't he? He sent them out and he said, make sure y'all take plenty of money and food with you. Is that what he said? He said, don't take anything with you. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to take care of my sheep. In order for us to get where we need to be as a congregation, going into the world and reaching the lost, we're going to have to feel bad about some of this for a little while and figure out how we're going to make some sacrifices for the Lord. And we need to see him the same way that Peter saw him here. You have sheep and lambs to nurture and feed as well. And Jesus has asked us to feed his sheep. We need to be looking for ways to do that. And that's it. You can. Oh, is there any questions, or is we ringing the bell in 40 seconds? Any questions? It's heavy, isn't it? This is you can read this a couple of different ways, but I think they're all correct too. That you can read it with a heavy hand or a compassionate hand, and I think that there's something to benefit either way. Go ahead.
You were saying all that, but I never really thought about it. But if you ever get reprimanded at work or by a teacher in school or something, and then they say, and you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I won't do that again," and they say, "Well, now I want you to go and do something." You know that you've been reinstated because they wouldn't want you to go do something else.
This is a good point, and Jesus does that here. That's a really good point, and I don't know if I brought that out very well, but that's true. The fact that he's saying, feed my sheep is a very encouraging thing. Hey, he doesn't hate me. Peter's going, maybe he does care about me. I must have really let him down. But then why is he asking me to go do this? Anybody else? All right, thank you. touching him.